You're listening to the Greeks Gridiron. Now here's your host, Ethan Hristodoulou.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to the Greeks Gridiron. I am Ethan Hristodoulou, and power rankings have come and gone. We have officially left those behind in the regular season, but we still have playoff games being played. We still have playoff predictions being made, and we still have to react to these games as they happen. So, replacing the power rankings as we go through the playoffs, I will just be diving into the games, sharing my thoughts, takeaways, like very brief looks ahead for the teams that are getting knocked out of the playoffs as we go through. So I invite you all to comment down below. Let me hear your takeaways about the losers of this week, the winners this week, some of the results that we got from this weekend slate of games. What are your hot takes? Sam Darnold crumbling on Monday Night Football in what is thankfully our last Monday Night Football game of the season. I hate Monday Night Football games to begin with. I really hate the doubleheaders and playoff Monday night games. No, thank you. I like games being on Sunday, please and thanks. The Thursday night game is fine, and even that I wish would go away. I love football on the weekends and strictly the weekends only, but we'll dive in. We'll take a look at the first match. We'll go in order as the games played out this week. So starting first, of course, the Chargers going into Houston to take on the Texans, and ultimately the Texans knocking them down 32-12. An absolute shellacking that I don't really think anyone saw coming. It started with that slow start that the Chargers had despite having some things break their way, settling for three on back-to-back drives, and then from there, you never could really get anything going. And I think it kind of encapsulated where this Chargers team is right now. A team that was probably a little bit ahead of schedule, but thanks to some really good coaching on Jim Harbaugh's end and just by the staff that he has assembled altogether, this is a team that was ahead of where they probably should be. It's clear they need better pass catchers overall. The running game itself is something to build on, but definitely needs improvement there. The offensive line, a group that has Rashawn Slater and Joel Alt on the bookends, don't get me wrong, but a group that I do think needs another piece to really solidify that unit there. But overall, it was just an ugly performance from this team from top to bottom, especially on the offensive side with the 4 sacks. Herbert was pressured on 50% of his dropbacks. You had the 4 interceptions coming from him, one of them being a tipped pass off of Will Dissly's hands. But I would say that the other 3 interceptions that Justin Herbert threw were pretty much on his. I know another one kind of went through the hands of his receiver, but I mean, that was an overshot. And Justin Herbert seemed like he was having a really hard time connecting with his guys in this game. So overall, from top to bottom on the Chargers end, it was not good. But the Texans, though, the big highlight for me really was C.J. Stroud and that 99-yard touchdown drive, basically kind of reminding everyone of what every NFL fan, it seemed like, and all the media fell in love with last year during his rookie season. It feels like a lot of people were so quick to turn on him with the sophomore slump and people just saying, oh, he looks bad. He does not look quite like the guy he was last season. But that drive really did put a big stamp on the season for him. And yeah, maybe not quite as productive. There's a lot of things going on around CJ Stroud that are kind of out of his control, but he is still making the most of his opportunity where he has been able to. He's still finding Nico Collins, racking up over 100 yards passing towards him with the 7 receptions he threw to Collins. Joe Mixon has been huge for this team. And the Texans overall, they're a team that when they're able to run the football effectively and be able to at least battle in the trenches, maybe not necessarily win all the time, but be competitive and be able to battle up front on both offensive and defense. This is a team that is threatening. It's just a matter of them being able to put it all together. We've seen some struggles from the offensive line, and we kind of saw a little bit of it in this game as well, but it was definitely better than we have seen for very big stretches of the season here. The defensive side as well was unbelievable. I mean, the pass rush that they have over there in Houston that is brewing right now. And I love that the ageless Danico Autry is a guy that just continues to be a factor in these AFC South teams no matter where it is during his career. He just continues to be a playmaker, combined with, of course, Will Anderson Jr., Daniil Hunter. Mario Edwards is in there for a sack and a half in this game, along with the sack and a half that Anderson racked up as well. And then you have, of course, Derek Stingley Jr. and Kamari Lassiter, the duo at cornerback, but Stingley himself, I mean, my God, 5 pass breakups, a couple of interceptions in this game. Talk about in a national in front of a national audience, being able to really put on a show and announce your kind of arrival to the league and just let everyone know just exactly what you've been doing since getting into the NFL. I mean, just a monster day for the defense. A lot can be said about the offense kind of coming together in this game here and looking a lot better than they have in the last handful of weeks. It felt like maybe the Titans game, in hindsight now, further away after another game being a playoff game at that. Maybe that was the get-right game for them, but it feels like this offense has maybe found a little bit of a rhythm. The defense is clearly firing on all cylinders, and that's no surprise. D'Amico Ryans has his guys right basically every single game that he gets into, but I really do like the way this Texans team looked this week, and I at least feel a lot better about them going into next week's game. Granted, they have a pretty tough matchup en route with the Chiefs coming up, but I feel at least better about the Texans than I did a week ago. I don't necessarily know if they're still set up to be able to take down the Chiefs, but I'm feeling better about them, and I think that's the biggest takeaway from that 32-12 win over the Chargers. The next game, Steelers and Ravens. Unfortunately for this one, with the Ravens winning 28-14, this game went about how I expected it. The score was like slightly different from what I predicted. I think my final score was 30-17, so I expected a few more points from both sides. But ultimately, this was kind of how I thought the game was going to go. You had a Baltimore Ravens team that's coming in and just absolutely steamrolling right now. And the Steelers have been suspect, and the last 5 weeks of their season have not been good, struggling to put up more than 17 points, and their last 5 games, they were not able to get over that 17-point mark, and again here, finishing it with 14. The last time they played the Ravens, things did not look good for the Pittsburgh Steelers altogether. I mean, and from the way the defense is just set up right now and the offensive deficiencies that they have, my biggest concern going into the game was, A, if they could keep pace with the Ravens if things got out of hand, but also just were they actually built to stop this Ravens rushing attack? And they clearly are not, because the first time they played, for whatever the reason was, the Ravens, despite averaging what was like a whopping 7 yards per carry or something, it was like a ludicrous number. They, for whatever reason, did not run the football more than 17 times in that game. I harped on it a lot coming out of that game and going into the second matchup. They ended up running the football to the tune of over 30 times in the second game, bulldozing for over 200 yards. And then in this game here, and I said the same thing in my preview, don't outthink yourself in this. Run the football. And what did the Ravens do? They ran the football a whopping 50 times in this game to the tune of 299 yards. This was what I wanted to see from the Ravens. It's what I expected from the Ravens. And now the Steelers, you have a lot of questions. And I do think that there is a fair conversation to be had in regards to just Mike Tomlin and where this team stands with him as the head coach. But the more I think on it, and this is something that I feel like I'm spending a little bit of time looking into because it's a conversation that's got louder and louder the last couple of years, and I know some of my diehard Steelers fans out there are really starting to feel this opinion of maybe it's time to move on from Tomlin here, but I like Tomlin as a coach, and you have to say that having not a single losing season has to go some distance for him in his argument for why he shouldn't go. And maybe he's just good enough to keep teams competitive, but maybe just not quite where he needs to be to get them over the hump. Maybe that's a conversation to be had. But I'm starting to really want to look at the front office here and guys like Omar Khan as their GM and just who is deciding to bring in some of the player personnel that they have on this roster here. And don't get me wrong, there's incredible talent on this team, but there's also been some very questionable just decision-making that has gone on with the quarterback from the tail end of Ben Roethlisberger's career to the drafting of Kenny Pickett to working with Justin Fields and Russell Wilson in this dual QB year they had. Russell Wilson isn't even my biggest gripe with the Steelers this year. And honestly, at this point, with the quarterback situation being the way it is, I almost feel like keeping Russell Wilson for at least another year might not be a bad idea for Pittsburgh because I don't really look at him as the problem. I just think that there's not enough talent on this team, especially on the offensive side of the ball. I know you got a lot of defensive studs. There are some areas that need to be shored up in, and I think we saw a real big case of that in this game against Baltimore, but I almost think we need to look more so at the front office than anything else, because again, like it has to speak for how good of a coach Mike Tomlin is, that he keeps this team relevant. No matter the roster, they're still winning these football games. And it's, again, I recognize the conversation. I think it is fair to have the conversation that maybe the Steelers have to move on. I just feel like the answer might be a little bit more complex than simply firing Mike Tomlin, because if you think of like other head coaches that have been fired this offseason or just have been in a fluid position the last few years of their coaching careers, like if you take like a Mike McCarthy, do you think if you put Mike McCarthy on this team wins 10 games and makes it to the playoffs? I don't really know. So there is a lot. I think the conversation, what I'm trying to get at here is just, it's a little bit more complex than just fire Mike Tomlin. I think we need to look at a few different things. Tomlin, one of them, but also some of the decision makers that are in the front office that are bringing in the personnel, that are collaborating with Mike Tomlin on who is being drafted, who is being signed, who is being let go, and that sort of thing. The Broncos and Bills, I don't really have a ton on this game here because it was a beatdown, and it was kind of an anticipated beatdown at that. I expected the Buffalo Bills to have a really good game. I thought maybe Denver could keep it a little bit closer, but I did expect the Buffalo Bills to win fairly comfortably. I had them winning by at least a possession, but I mean, I do think that for the Broncos side of this, yes, you lose 31-7. Really tough way to go down. You want them to be a little bit more competitive here, but I think a congratulations is in order for this team and a job well done, because this was a team that I don't think anyone really pegged for being like in the running, never mind making the playoffs. And the fact that they even got themselves into a position to have a playoff game might not have been the prettiest road to get there. The Chiefs kind of let you walk your way in because they didn't want to see the Cincinnati Bengals, and rightfully so. I think that this game would have been far more interesting if we had Cincinnati going strike for strike with Buffalo on this one. But I will say that through one season, based off of the current information we have, it feels like you have your franchise guy in Denver. You have a very young, impressive core on defense led by guys like Nick Bonito, Jonathan Cooper, and Patrick Surtain in the secondary. There is a lot to be excited about with Denver, and this is a team that I expect with a head coach like Sean Payton, who... It's funny to look back on this because a lot of people gave him a lot of crap for being so all in and being so excited about Bo Nix and not even his press conference, the like Zoom interview that he did following the drafting of him. But it's clear he got his guy, and from everything that I've seen from Bo Nix, somebody who got so much flack for being old coming out of college, it looks like that experience benefited him. And it kind of goes back to the whole conversation about giving quarterbacks time to develop. Yeah, he moved around a little bit towards the back end of his collegiate career, but the fact that he had so much time to play in the college ranks, and yeah, he got thrown into the fire a little bit as a rookie this year, but they clearly trusted him and thought he was ready. Giving guys time to develop and being able to learn their craft rather than just going after a guy who... And I'm going to take a shot at a team that I root for here, maybe going after a guy who has 13 total starts as a quarterback from college and thrusting him in as the number, 4 overall selection might not be the greatest idea. So experience is valuable at the quarterback position, and I think Bo Nix is a very good example of that. But I like where Denver is trending right now. On the Bills side of things, I don't think you can walk away from this game being any happier if you tried. You come in... You have an opponent that is considerably inferior to you in basically all aspects of the game, all things considered, where this team is in comparison to where you are right now, and you come in and you bounce them the way you should. This offense racked up over 470 yards in this game here, and they looked every bit the part of a number 2 seed from the offensive side of the football to the defensive side of the ball. Like, you had the one big gaffe where you let up the big touchdown, but beyond that, you could not have played a better game if you were Buffalo, and You've got to feel pretty good going into next week's matchup against Baltimore. Tough task, tough test. A team that smacked you around in the regular season, but obviously a very long time ago. These are two very different teams from that point to now at this stage in the season, but you could not have had a better tune-up matchup to kind of get yourself ready for what is going to be in my eyes, a battle and one of the best playoff games that we could possibly have. So I'm excited for what Buffalo's looking like right now. You literally could not have asked for anything more from them out of this game here, and they should be feeling pretty good going into Baltimore. Flipping on back over to the NFC, though, we'll look at the Green Bay Packers and the Philadelphia Eagles here. Eagles coming in and taking down Green Bay 22-10. On the Packers side, injuries were the big thing that really stuck out to me, aside from some poor performances. But it just felt like, especially late in that game, it felt like everyone in Green Bay was going down and everything was just falling apart, from the mistakes on field to the unfortunate injuries that kept popping up. I don't want to sound like I'm making mistakes here, making up excuses here. But I mean, Jordan Love had one of those games, and this is now, it's been a few times where we've seen Jordan Love in big spots have kind of these really bad performances, and this is something that we'll have to keep an eye on as well, because 3 interceptions is not what you want to see from this game. The Packers altogether, and I mean, talk about starting the game off poorly. You have the fumble that leads to 6 points literally on the opening kickoff. So just a bad start to the game. You could not get away from the mistakes as Jordan Love was throwing those interceptions, and ultimately Green Bay just felt like a team that was a little bit outmatched and maybe overpowered by a Philadelphia Eagles team that in my eyes is, and I had them ranked at number 1, so best team in football. But you lost in the trenches. You lost the battle. This is a tough team in Philadelphia, and you have to play tougher than they are, and that's not an easy task. And unfortunately for Green Bay, they just did not seem like they were up for it. Now, on Philadelphia's side, definitely not perfect. And like I said, I had them ranked at number 1 as the best team in football coming out of the regular season, between just what I've seen from them production-wise, offensively or defensively, and just the amount of depth that they have on their entire roster as well. I will say this game did scare me a little bit about them offensively, just with their inability to finish for 6. That is something that going forward, you had a couple of touchdowns, but you had to settle for 3 a handful of times as well. Going forward, against some of the teams you are coming up against or potentially coming up against in the NFC, you got to be getting 6. You can't be settling for 3. If you find yourself in an NFC championship matchup against Detroit, you absolutely are not going to be coming away with a victory settling for 3 points against that offense there. I understand Philadelphia's defense is really good. Don't get me wrong. Again, I had them ranked number 1 coming out of the regular season, but you have to be able to match points for points if things get out of hand with a team like Detroit. So that was a little bit scary, but you have Saquon Barkley. You have a really good offensive line that keeps you moving, keeps you driving down the field and at least getting those 3 points. So it's not all negatives, and ball protection is always a big plus as well. No turnovers in this game. The defense will be the anchor for this team in my eyes here, because again, as somebody who, and this is the 4th time I'm saying this, but I want to keep reiterating it because I don't want to sound like I'm ragging on the Eagles too much despite their win. As somebody who ranked them number 1 coming out of the regular season, I understand that the defense is kind of the backbone of this team, and the run game as well. It's basically what they can do on the ground offensively, and then on top of that, just this defense being able to absolutely smother their opposing offenses that they're facing here. They have a fantastic blend of youth and experience, so I like what this team is built around. I think it's built around good quality playoff football and an excellent defense the way they are currently built, combined with a running attack that is as good as literally anyone's in the NFL right now, will go a long way for you. But we need to see long sustained drives that don't just end in 3 but end in 6, especially when you're looking at teams like the Commanders, who can put up points, as we've seen throughout the entirety of this season, and a team like Detroit, who you're also potentially going to end up clashing with should you make it to the NFC Championship, and they do as well. Speaking of Commanders, though, Washington and Tampa Bay. got to look at this game here. I've got to give some serious credit to the Commanders. I counted them out on this one here. I thought Tampa Bay was going to get the job done here, but we really got to, everyone needs to give Jaden Daniels his flowers. And on top of that, there are people out there that I think owe Jaden Daniels a bit of an apology, because the people that were banging the table screaming college quarterback, college system, this is only working because there isn't any tape on him. Well, we are currently now into him having played through 17 regular season games. He did miss some of that game where he went down, or he got hurt, and I can't remember who it was that they were playing against, but the 40-7 game that they had, whoever that opponent was, I don't know why I can't think of who it is. I can remember the score, but I can't remember who they actually beat. But we have seen Jaden Daniels play through an entire season's worth of football, to put it simply, and there's plenty of tape on him now, and he's still finding success. He's still having games where he's putting up 300 total yards from scrimmage. And the way I see it, at this stage, in this current moment, Jaden Daniels was the best quarterback coming out of that draft class. At this current moment, that's subject to change. It's not final, but as things currently stand right now, I think it is fair to come up with that assumption. Long, methodical drives, especially in the second half, doing just everything that needed to be done correctly to put yourself into position to win this football game when the clock struck 0, when you ultimately set up the bank shot off the crossbar to get it in for the field goal. But I mean, it ultimately led to them literally having the ball for 10 more minutes more than Tampa Bay did. And just his ability to hook up with, like, Terry McLaurin has been awesome to watch. And in this game as well, De'Ami Brown, we are seeing some incredible stuff from Jaden Daniels, and I cannot sing his praises enough. And then on the defensive side, being able to hold Tampa Bay to under 300 offensive yards, the forced fumble that was inside the Tampa Bay 20 that set up 6 points right after as well was massive for them. I mean, every single facet of this team playing on all cylinders against the Tampa Bay team that we have seen dump points on teams. And this Commanders defense has not been perfect by any stretch of the imagination. They did a good job of mitigating a Tampa Bay rushing attack that's been really, really good as well. And Washington is a team that is amongst the worst in the NFL in terms of run defense and total yards allowed on the ground. So this was a really, really strong and convincing performance in my eyes for this Commanders team that a lot of people, and myself included, had counted out in this game. On the flip side, though, Tampa Bay, this one's definitely going to sting. I mean, and this is technically a regression from last season because you at least had a playoff win. You won the division and won a playoff game over Philadelphia last year. So this is technically a regression year, taking a step back, not winning a playoff game, and especially being in a spot where you had an opportunity to potentially put the game away, and Baker Mayfield ultimately coughing up the football cost them 6, and they ultimately cannot come away with the victory when it's all said and done. I will say, though, that with Tampa Bay, they're at least a very young group of guys. You have some older veterans in some key positions here, but the team overall, especially on the defensive side, more so than the offensive side, because you are relying on Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, who aren't getting any younger, but more so on the defensive side, but you do still have a decent amount of young guys to work with too. I think we need to see a little bit more infusion of veteran leadership on the defensive side of the ball, but also maybe some more younger talent on the offensive side. So this is a team that has a lot of really good building blocks. There's also a lot of contracts up this offseason, so I'm curious to see who gets let go, who gets brought back. We could see some decent turnover here, but the way I see it, with the core group of guys that you have defensively that are very young and up and coming, and then Chris Godwin coming back next year, if you can go out and get yourself a legitimate threat at wide receiver to pair with your two savvy vets in Mike Evans and in Chris Godwin, and maybe you already have that guy on your roster and someone steps up rather than having to go and get someone. I don't know. I just feel like they need another weapon on offense. I love the committee backfield that they have as far as running back goes, and I wouldn't change a thing. That's a trio of guys I would just run it back with next year. But I do think that adding just one more weapon in that receiving room could really help out Tampa, and the defense just needs another veteran or two to really round out that group of young, feisty guys that are going to only continue to grow and get better, I would assume. Like the direction Tampa is in right now, or position I should say that they're in, the direction that they go in is what I'm most curious about, though. And then finally, but certainly not least, Minnesota going into Arizona to play the Rams, but ultimately coming up short as the Rams, winning 27-9. The Rams defense is the story of this football game and might just be the story of this team depending on how far they go. The constant pressure that they kept Sam Darnold under with the duress and that you could clearly see on his face, and just the panicking in the pocket. He never looked comfortable in this game, like never at any real point. It led to a pair of takeaways, a strip sack, and an interception from him. On top of that, you racked up 9 total sacks on the evening as well. I mean, if it weren't for the near 100 yards worth of penalties that the Rams put up, this game could have gotten wildly out of hand. 27-9 makes this game look closer than it actually was. It was literally just penalties and failures on third downs too, because they did have some issues there on the Rams side of things that kept this game from really getting out of hand. And I also want to shout out punter Ethan Evans. Guys that don't get a lot of love or respect. Ethan Evans is a weapon on special teams. His ability to punt and just nail teams inside the 10-yard line is pretty impressive, all things considered. I feel like I'm constantly watching him punt balls and pinning people, not inside, forget the inside the 20, like inside the 10, and very consistently at that. So the Rams are in a really good spot right now. A really young, aggressive, feisty defense that, in my eyes, is playing well above their experience, but there's so many just good players on that defense, led by Sean McVay, Matthew Stafford, who is ice cold when he needs to be, especially against teams that love to blitz. He was literally the kryptonite to what the Vikings do. They love blitzing. They love sending extra guys, but Matthew Stafford is so good at finding the correct guy to get the football to and throwing into blitzes. This was how I thought he was going to attack that defense, and he did just that, finding a lot of his guys in a lot of big ways. On the Vikings side, though, these last 2 weeks, and I hate to sound definitive about this, but I've had my reservations about Sam Darnold all season long. I wasn't buying into it, and there was a certain point within the first handful of weeks of the season where there was a stretch of games where I felt like I saw the Sam Darnold of old. But beyond that, I mean, the totality of the season was really, really good. This is a Sam Darnold career year, 14 wins, most touchdowns he's ever thrown, most passing yards. This was as good of a season as you could have possibly asked from Sam Darnold. But the pressure, something he struggled with while he was in New York, and it's the Jets, so fair enough. But the pressure, when you ran into a couple of defenses that are able to bring a ton of it, gave him a lot of issues, and we saw him regress to some of the issues that he had while he was in New York. And to go back to the meme of, he was seeing ghosts, we kind of saw it in this Monday Night Football game, and we got a good preview of it in Sunday Night Football to wrap up the season as well against Detroit last week as well. It was a great season, great story for him overall, but with the crumbling the last couple of weeks and a lot of conversation just kind of brewing around what Minnesota's going to do at quarterback, if it was more certain, I don't think that conversation and that smoke would be coming up and bellowing out as much as it is. It feels like Minnesota ends up moving on, and they're going to either run their luck with J.J. McCarthy or maybe look elsewhere at quarterback. I don't know. I've got to say that I have so much respect for Kevin O'Connell and just what he is able to do with his offensive scheme. It's very clear that he can maximize guys' talent, but at the end of the day, he needs that guy. He needs ice in their veins. He needs somebody who is a legit franchise quarterback, and I genuinely do not know if that guy is on the roster yet. A lot of bad things were coming out in regards to J.J. McCarthy's performance during training camp last offseason, preseason, leading into the season, whatever you want to call it. So that is something that still sits in the back of my mind. But after seeing what he could do with Sam Darnold, I'm assuming that Kevin O'Connell could mitigate some of those issues and help lead him in the right way. But at this point here, is JJ going to be that guy? I don't know. But at this point, with what we've seen, I assume that we may have seen the last time Sam Darnold plays in a Minnesota Vikings uniform. But what a season it was. On top of that, Justin Jefferson not seeing a ball, I believe, a single time in the second half, or at least catching a ball at least once in the second half, is ludicrous considering who Justin Jefferson is. And a blitz that, just like I'd mentioned, gave so many teams problems this year, in a pass rush that was just so effective being virtually ineffective. Yeah, they got a couple of sacks on Matthew Stafford, but beyond those two, he never really seemed fazed in the pocket at all by what Minnesota was bringing. So tough look for a Vikings team that had a massive season, one that it felt like every single week that I was watching the Rams win a game and I would look at their record in the standings and go, I cannot believe that this is this team's record right now, ultimately crashing and burning in one of the uglier finishes we've seen in recent memory for a team that was so highly touted, that was literally this, had the opportunity. I don't want to say this close because they got blown out, but I will say that they were this close to potentially locking up a 1 seed going into the final week of the season. But those are my thoughts, just my takeaways from this weekend's games. We got predictions coming out later this week for the divisional round of the playoffs. Make sure to tune in for that as well. As the season starts to roll on and wrap up here, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to be kind of shifting more to just like news conversation, things going on. We'll look towards free agency and the draft and stuff like that for teams and whatnot. I haven't settled on exactly what I'm going to do, but just know that that's kind of the shift we'll be making once the season wraps up. But for now, predictions, reactions to the games, discussion on the teams that are getting knocked out of the playoffs and kind of where they could be going, or just my thoughts on them as they end the season or wherever they end their season. That will be kind of what we're doing. So as always, if you made it to the end, greatly appreciate it. I will see you all next time. Have a good one.